Have you ever actually done a double take? I mean a true double take, where you blink a few times, rub your eyes real good, and make sure that what you just saw was actually real. Well, I think I had that happen to me a couple of weeks ago. While many Lord of the Rings fans believe that the Rankin-Bass Hobbit and the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings were the first film adaptations of Tolkien's classics, they actually weren't. In other words, all of us have been deceived, for another film was made. The true first film adaptation of Tolkien's work was actually released during his lifetime in 1967, though I'm not sure if he ever got to see it, which was probably for the best. This secret film was made in just a few months and was the reason that Tolkien got hustled into purchasing the film rights of his own story for a whopping $100,000. If you've never heard about this before, then strap in, because you're in for a bumpy ride. Meet the 1967 animated Hobbit, an insane fever dream of a journey through, can I even call it Middle-earth? Probably not. In this story, we meet a human, Thorin Oakenshield, a dragon named Slag the Terrible, and a princess who Bilbo ends up marrying at the end of the story. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to Fact or Fantasy. I talk about all things Tolkien on this channel, so if you're a movie and book fan, subscribe and join the community. As always, before we jump into this crazy story, I want to shout out Jason, Joshua, Timothy, Robo Steve, and the rest of my incredible Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. Today, we're going to be diving into the Wild West of ancient adaptations to take a look at the Snyder Cut of Tolkien's The Hobbit. And no, it's not the Snyder Cut that you're thinking of. This is William Snyder, the hustling producer from the 1960s. We'll uncover how this project began, how the creatives behind it completely warped and rewrote Tolkien's work, and then how through the hustle of the century, they sold Tolkien's own story back to him for a fortune. Normally, I would say sit back and relax, but today it's more like hold on tight and please don't click off the video. If I have to watch this acid trip of a film, so do you. This is really a tale as old as time, or at least as old as Hollywood. Film producer gets rights to an iconic story, partners with a team of creatives, and then sabotages the creatives in order to turn a profit, at the expense of the original IP, of course. And in order to understand this tale, we need to meet the main characters. Really, there are only two key players involved here, and they are William Snyder and Gene Deitch. Long before Ralph Bakshi brought Middle-earth to the big screen, he was cutting his teeth at Terrytoons, a studio that, interestingly enough, would eventually serve as a springboard for the creative mind behind our 1967 Hobbit. This man was Gene Deitch, an animator with a serious artistic pedigree and a deep-seated love for jazz. Deitch somewhat stumbled into the industry as his work for the magazine Record Changer was so distinct that it caught the eye of Hollywood's elite, leading him through the ranks of legendary houses like UPA and Terrytoons. But the real shift happened in 1959 when Deitch's world collided with a man named William L. Snyder. Snyder was the head of Rembrandt Films, and he was a producer defined by total, unshakable confidence. He was the kind of guy who openly bragged about refusing to believe in the common cold and would look in the mirror and declare, "I'm a beautiful man." But behind the narcissism was a shrewd, visionary opportunist. Snyder had figured out how to bridge a massive gap in the market. He used state-sponsored studios in Prague to produce high-quality animation at a fraction of the cost, effectively funneling Eastern European talent behind the Iron Curtain straight into the American living room. But there was a massive cultural issue that Snyder was facing. The Czech animators worked at a leisurely, artistic pace that was completely at odds with the slam-bam high-speed tempo required for Western cartoons. And this is where Gene Deitch came into play. Snyder needed Deitch to act as a creative translator, teaching these artists how to hit the fast-paced gags that made properties like Tom and Jerry, Popeye, and Beetle Bailey commercially viable. So, against the backdrop of the Cold War, this odd couple partnership actually worked. In 1961, they reached the summit of the industry when their short film Monroe won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short. While Snyder's company held the production credits, Deitch was always quick to point out that the creative soul of the project belonged to the man behind the desk, which was him. But now with an Oscar in their pocket and a proven system for bypassing international borders, the extravagantly optimistic Snyder and the jazz-loving Deitch were suddenly ready to take on the world. And it was during this high that Snyder encountered a story like no other that he knew he had to get his hands on. You see, Gene Deitch shared once that Snyder had a skill for finding relatively unknown stories with potential, and in 1961, The Hobbit was just that. We have to remember that despite the story having been published in the 30s, and despite its cult following in the 40s and 50s, it didn't reach mass popularity until the mid-60s and 70s. So, in 1961, when Snyder read The Hobbit and decided that he had to have the film rights, he secured a lease agreement that was, by any standard, an absolute steal. Finalized in 1962, the initial 5-year lease required a shockingly small financial commitment, a mere $15,000 advance to Tolkien and his publisher. And this was not only for The Hobbit, but for the future rights to The Lord of the Rings as well, despite it not being published in the US at that time. Gene Deitch and other historians have since described the sum for these rights as nothing more than peanuts. As for the professor himself, Tolkien was deeply apprehensive about the whole affair. He hadn't yet forgotten the sting of the aborted 1958 film treatment by Morton Grady Zimmerman, a script Tolkien had absolutely shredded apart for its lack of fidelity to the text. This time around, though, rather than fighting for creative control, Tolkien decided he would simply take the money and leave the producers to their own devices. But this meant that he wasn't under any illusions about the quality of the work to come, and he had remarked that Snyder was sure to perpetrate many objectionable things upon his beloved story. With the rights secured, Snyder handed Gene Deitch a faded 1937 copy of The Hobbit and told him to get to work. Very quickly, Deitch caught the fever for the story, and along with his writing partner Bill Bernal, spent a year in Prague drafting a feature-length screenplay. But because the book was still relatively obscure in America, Snyder's marching orders were unashamed and clear. Hollywoodize it. Make it sell. What followed was a systematic dismantling of Tolkien's lore to fit the tropes of mid-century cinema. Deitch and Bernal viewed a bachelor hobbit and a company of 13 male dwarves as a commercial liability. Their solution? They cut the dwarves entirely. Only Thorin Oakenshield remained, but he was stripped of his heritage and reimagined as a mere human general. Then, to inject a mandatory romantic subplot, they invented a female protagonist, Princess Mika of Dale. The story was redesigned to end with Bilbo marrying the princess, effectively turning our quiet, pipe-smoking hobbit into a swashbuckling romantic hero, complete with musical numbers and palatable name changes for the legendary creatures. After all, what American child is going to like the name Smaug? So it became Slag the Terrible instead. However, midway through this Americanization, the paperback release of The Lord of the Rings hit the US, and Deitch realized the true gravity of the mythology he was butchering. He began a frantic backspacing process, retrofitting elements of the sequel into his script, most notably ensuring that the magic ring was explicitly labeled as the One Ring, in order to leave the door open for a potential animated sequel in the future. After all, the deal was that Snyder had obtained the rights to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Visually, the project was staggering in its ambition. Deitch pitched a technique called imagination, a precursor to modern compositing that would layer 2D characters over 3D physical models. To pull it off, he recruited Yuri Trinka, the Walt Disney of Eastern Europe. Working out of a Prague theater where Mozart once played, Trinka produced a series of haunting crayon sketches, including a dragon with jewel-toned scales. Yet, even with a legend like Trinka on board, the production was still finding its footing in the mud of the lore. In those early designs, the team hadn't quite grasped the weight of a character like Gollum, and Trinka famously even forgot to give Bilbo his signature furry feet. They were standing on the edge of a cinematic vision that would have looked like a lavish moving painting, even if the story itself was drifting dangerously far from the Shire. But it was then, after nearly 5 years of work on this massive project, that everything changed. Deitch and his wife, Zdenka, set sail for New York on an ocean liner to pitch their feature-length vision to the suits at 20th Century Fox, the studio that William Snyder had been banking on retroactively funding this project. Deitch spent that 6-day crossing hunched over a typewriter, hammering out the final, frantic revisions to the script. But the meeting in New York was a total train wreck before Deitch ever arrived. According to Deitch, Snyder blew the deal before they even walked through the door by demanding an astronomical sum of money to fund the Imagination Tech and Trinka's elaborate sets. You have to remember, back then, the name Tolkien didn't carry any weight in a Hollywood boardroom. The executives had no idea what The Hobbit even was, and they certainly weren't going to gamble a massive budget on an unknown fantasy property. The deal collapsed, Trinka was cut loose, and Gene Deitch was left holding a 125-page screenplay that suddenly had nowhere to go. It was, in his own words, utterly crushing. And it couldn't have been worse timing for someone like Deitch, because while the film was dying in a boardroom, the world outside was hitting a fever pitch. In 1965, the Tolkien craze officially exploded in America, triggered, ironically, by a messy copyright war. A publisher called Ace Books found a loophole in the US import laws and released an unauthorized, pirated paperback of The Lord of the Rings. You see, when The Lord of the Rings was originally published in America, they were only hardbacks, and they didn't manufacture every part of the process here in the US. It's hard to find all of the details about the story since it did happen a very long time ago, but from what I can gather, Tolkien's publishers actually printed them in Europe and then had them shipped to America, which by some American copyright laws voided their rights, making it seem like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings would fall into the public domain. It definitely was a gray area and a legal loophole that Ace Books took advantage of. And when this pirated paperback version of The Lord of the Rings came out at a much cheaper rate than his hardbacks, Tolkien was furious. He didn't just sit back, he leveraged his growing readership, urging fans to boycott the pirated editions and wait for his official Ballantine paperback versions, which were soon to come. This grassroots campaign turned into a nationwide phenomenon. Between the environmental themes and the anti-industrialist message of the books, Middle-earth resonated perfectly with the 1960s counterculture movement. Suddenly, these books weren't just niche British stories, they were the hottest property on the planet. And when The Lord of the Rings grew in popularity, so did The Hobbit. This put William Snyder in a very interesting and a very dangerous position. The rights he had snatched up for peanuts were now a potential goldmine, but he was staring down a ticking clock. His lease was set to expire on June 30th, 1967, which was fast approaching. If he didn't produce and exhibit a film by that deadline, everything, The Hobbit and his lucrative option for The Lord of the Rings, would revert back to the Tolkien estate. He was sitting on a fortune, and he was about to lose it all. But the ever-resourceful Bill Snyder wouldn't go down without a fight. So in just a few short months, he orchestrated one of the most insane hustles in Hollywood history. Snyder's legal team had been combing through the contract, and they found a loophole that was as wide as the Pelennor Fields. The agreement stated that Snyder had to produce a full-color motion picture version of The Hobbit and show it to a paying audience. But here's the catch. The lawyers who wrote it hadn't defined what a motion picture actually was. There was no requirement for length, frame rate, or even, infuriatingly, fidelity to the source material. Snyder realized that he didn't need a masterpiece. He needed a loophole. If he could produce a 12-minute short, just enough to fill one roll of film, before the deadline, he could legally lock down the rights and flip them to the highest bidder. As he probably would have put it, why invest money and 5 years of hard work when you can turn a profit without all that sweat? With only a few months left on their 5-year clock, Snyder gave Deitch a preposterous ultimatum. Got your 125-page epic and deliver me a 12-minute finished film to New York in 30 days. Deitch thought Snyder had been smoking something wilder than his contraband Cuban cigars, but as an employee, he had no choice. He had to put his years of hard work through a mind shredder. What emerged was a breathless, surreal synopsis that Deitch called The Ghost of the Hobbit. Because the earlier script had already cut the dwarves and added Princess Mika, those radical changes were now permanently baked into the story. The plot is a fever dream. It starts in Dale, the city of Golden Bells, before men ruined magic forever.
This was Dale, the city of Golden Bells, in the time of Middle-earth, before men came to power and ruined magic forever.
A monster lizard named Slag the Terrible destroys the city and steals the Arkenstone, which at that point is the prized possession of the men of Dale. No one actually lives in the mountain. The only survivors of Slag's attack? General Thorin Oakenshield, reimagined as a human, Princess Mika, and a nameless watchman who slept through the attack. They find Gandalf, who consults a great book and tells them only a hobbit can kill the dragon. So they head to the Shire, recruit a reluctant Bilbo, and the quest begins. The pacing is frantic. For example, take a look at this clip.
And he didn't know that his time had come. All at once they were there, eating his food, shouting for more, filling the air with terrifying words about dragons, fire, stolen gold, and death. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you are all talking about, cried Bilbo Baggins. We are talking about you, said the wizard Gandalf. You!
That is not my editing, and I did not speed that up. It actually cuts that quickly between Bilbo alone and the guests arriving. Then they breeze past groans, trolls that turn into trees.
A crushed cabin burns a stolen lamb to feed groans, hungry brutes with skin as thick as bark.
And then Bilbo falls and meets Gollum. That's right, it's not Gollum, it's Gollum. And when I say falls, I mean just that.
Then, suddenly, Bilbo was gone. Down through a crevasse with a soundless scream as the others trudged on. What horrid little nasty has come to steal our ring, my precious? We must squeeze it till it dies, yes? We durstn't let it take our dearest ring, Gollum.
All of a sudden, Bilbo has the ring and escapes, leading to a climax that is a total departure from Tolkien. Bilbo steals the Arkenstone somehow, crafts a crossbow out of mining tools somehow, and shoots the heart-shaped gem directly into the dragon's chest, killing Slag.
Together with the others, he fashioned a powerful crossbow from old mining tools, and the Arkenstone, the white heart of Dale, was the arrowhead destined for the black heart of Slag.
Then the film ends with Bilbo marrying the princess and heading home.
And Bilbo and Mika reigned there together. But finally they returned to that quiet, comfortable life in Hobbiton. Until the next time that Gandalf the Grey would knock upon the round, green door.
To hit the 30-day deadline, any hope of imagination was tossed out of the window. Deitch recruited his friend Adolf Born, a brilliant Czech illustrator, to create a style that looked like a moving storybook. Instead of a frame-by-frame movement, they used limited animation, jointed paper cutouts, and static illustrations. Deitch just created the illusion of energy by manipulating the camera itself, zooming, panning, and using color filters to simulate flickering firelight. It was rudimentary, but it worked. For the audio, he invited his friend Herb Lass over to his apartment, where Lass voiced every single character in one sitting. The music was borrowed from composer Vaclav Lidl, with Deitch cutting the tracks together in his own living room. If you haven't picked up on it yet, Gene Deitch was essentially the creative mastermind behind this entire project, with Snyder in New York doing virtually nothing other than ruining that Fox deal. Now, it must be said that a lot of sources out there will tell you that Deitch had a 30-day timeline, but that's not entirely true. While I'm sure Snyder called him and demanded it to be done in 30 days, that request was actually made back in January sometime, and the film wasn't shown until their deadline in June, which we'll talk about in a moment. This was mainly because Deitch told Snyder that it was impossible to turn things around in 30 days. But he got to work all the same and did the best he could. And by the way, the reason I believe this side of things is because Gene Deitch himself posted an article back in 2012 about this whole story. Because Peter Jackson's The Hobbit was soon to be released, he wanted to give some information to the fans. Deitch actually scanned messages that he had sent to Snyder, and one of them was dated in January of 1967, months before the June deadline. And in that message, he was talking about having to gut the original script and make a new story. But still, to completely reimagine what you had already planned and produce it in just a few short months is impressive nonetheless. On June 29, 1967, Deitch landed in New York with a single 35mm print. Snyder had rented a tiny projection room for June 30th, the final day of his lease. To satisfy the paying audience requirement, they engaged in a bit of pure legal theater. Deitch walked out into the Manhattan sidewalk and started grabbing random strangers. He would hand them a dime from his own pocket and then ask them to walk inside the building and hand that same dime back to him as an admission fee. After the 12-minute screening, this bewildered audience of about 6 New Yorkers signed a legal affidavit confirming that they had paid to see a Hobbit movie. And with that, Snyder had his proof. This ashcan copy had fulfilled its purpose. It was a legal decoy that outmaneuvered the Tolkien estate and secured Snyder's hold on the most valuable mythology in modern history. The financial fallout of that bizarre New York screening was both immediate and wildly lucrative for William Snyder. By validating his lease through this hustle, he maintained an ironclad grip on the film rights exactly when they hit their peak valuation during the American Tolkien craze. Snyder, ever the pragmatist, realized that he didn't actually need to make a real movie to get rich. He abandoned any plans for a commercial feature and went straight to the negotiating table. By leveraging his position against the studio system, he sold those freshly extended rights back to the Tolkien estate for roughly $100,000. When you consider that his initial investment was a measly $15K and the 12-minute short was primarily made on the back of Gene Deitch, this was a massive profit, especially in the 60s. And speaking of Deitch, he didn't see a single cent of that windfall. As he later recounted with understandable bitterness, his share of what he called the weasel de boodle was exactly zip. He had spent 5 years of his life pouring his passion into a screenplay only to watch it be shredded to facilitate a loophole that enriched no one but his producer. If that's not Hollywood, I don't know what is. This transfer of rights from Snyder back to Tolkien essentially set the stage for the next 50 years of Middle-earth on screen. In 1969, United Artists officially bought the rights from Tolkien for $10,000 plus a 7.5% royalty. By 1976, they passed those rights to the Saul Zaentz Company, which paved the way for the 1977 Rankin-Bass Hobbit, Ralph Bakshi's ambitious 1978 Lord of the Rings, and eventually the multi-billion-dollar Peter Jackson trilogy. It's only 12 minutes, so I didn't show a lot of it today because you can easily look it up here on YouTube for a quick watch. The film went into the archives of the Rembrandt Films for nearly 45 years, until Snyder's son discovered the original 35mm film when looking through old storage boxes. Due to Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy being set to release around that time, Snyder's son decided to publish the 12-minute animated Hobbit online. But even after this, it has still remained a well-kept secret in the Tolkien fandom, and many don't know the deep lore behind it. The story of the making of this film is very telling of what we still see today from Hollywood. And during a time when Tolkien wasn't as well known, it was easy to completely rewrite his work without any repercussions. Even if they were able to release Deitch's original full-length film, it would have been drastically different from Tolkien's story. Nowadays, if the color of the elves' clothes are wrong, there are riots in the streets. But back then, Gene Deitch could add a love interest, remove the dwarves entirely, and rename the dragon all without anyone batting an eye. Thankfully, despite getting hustled into buying back their own story, the Tolkien estate has turned a great profit now. I don't think they're licking their wounds from this minor accident. But if Lord of the Rings hadn't been the success it became through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that deal with Snyder definitely would have stung a lot more. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look back at Tolkien's history, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe to help out the channel. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.